For 1 week, I've placed everything that I have in my life, like work and things like this, aside in order to learn chess for 8 hours, 7 days in 1 week. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I've learned in this video. Obviously, this time frame of just 1 week isn't enough actually to make anyone like an expert or a master, but indeed still I'm going to show you what I've learned in this time frame. In this video is specifically made for beginners and intermediates who have already been playing for like a few months, maybe 2 to half a year, maybe even to a year. But this is the people this video is for, so let's start. Now, one of the things that I've learned in this time frame is that there are two main ways that a player can either win or lose a chess game. The first one, and that is the more famous one, is where a player would make an attack and the attack would succeed and he would win. That is usually what a lot of players, when they're proud of their games, what they're going to show all of their students and things like this. The second way, the second scenario or second case or whatever, is more of a calm one. This is the scenario where a player would decide to get into a winning position first, then he would decide to materialize on that positional advantage. Then from this material advantage, he would decide to either increase this material advantage or to get into an end game with better odds due to this material advantage. So let me now show you this in action. So in short, here's one example where one player would not get a winning attack, but what he's going to do is get a material advantage and utilize this material advantage to his best. In here, I'm actually white and I'm losing. Why am I losing? First of all, I have a bishop for a knight, so that gives my opponent better endgame odds. That is one thing. The second thing is where I'm down a pawn and my pieces are a lot less active. So this knight, for example, controls only 2 squares compared to this one, okay, which is a lot better. And compared, of course, the knight with the bishop, as we've just talked about. This is one example. And in here, I have to admit, I've actually made a move which is a terrible move, actually. I've made the move knight to b3 because I was just thinking, okay, this knight is doing absolutely nothing. I need to move it somewhere, okay, to get it more activated. But the computer actually really dislikes it. He wants me to just like activate my king instead, probably. And so what my opponent does, which is a very strong player as well, is he's just utilizing it for his own advantage. He does knight to c4. Intending to strengthen his material advantage. Okay, I do knight to c5. He takes with the bishop, I take with the pawn. Okay, now he takes with the knight. So it's okay to take with the bishop because now he's just having a 2 pawns advantage, okay, compared to me who has just like nothing really, okay, and this pawn is isolated as well. So this material advantage, for example, would be very hard for me to overcome, okay? He's going to get also a 3 pawns advantage due to this pawn, and this pawn is very likely to queen sometime. Knight takes on b2, knight to e5, f6, he just kicks away my knight. I do knight to g4, and you see he's just calmly going to advance these pawns, okay, up until obviously not now. It's not going to progress this pawn now, okay, but in the future it's very likely that this pawn is going to become queen after the knight takes. So f3, okay, knight takes, king to f2, and b5. So now the plan is very clear. He's going to queen, and I'm lost basically. That is one scenario that we have. This is actually the more common scenario where the two players really need to know their opening theory, especially, and their positional understanding from what I found out. Okay, so let me now show you the opposite example, okay, where one side will just try to attack and win. Okay, usually this happens when the opponent's doing opposite castling, okay, so white castles queen side, black castles king side. This is usually where these types of attacks happen. I'll get on to what happens with the knight, okay, and the sequence of moves. What the white and black are trying to do is get their pawns to the side of the enemy king to open a file and to make an attack. That is in very, very general terms, okay? And the knight moved here, okay? You think, okay, he's gonna take the knight, but it's fine because you could win this always, okay? And you're also going to have a threat in here, okay? If you're taking with this knight versus the queen and bishop, okay? So let's say he takes here. And you see this bishop is still under threat. Actually, the best computer move, okay, is to go bishop to b3, okay? And in here, the best move, it's a theoretical line, okay, from one of the lines against the Najdorf, okay, Najdorf in the Sicilian. In here, the best computer move is b3, okay, to try to actually open the line. But after this, king is going to go here, okay, and we temporarily gave up a knight, okay. But we're going to also have our own very strong attack in here against the king, which means that the sacrifice is not that much of a problem. And so that's the other idea, okay? One side is going to just progress towards the enemy and try to open a file and to actually attack, okay? Now let's go to something else that I've learned. So now let me show you another thing that happens. Let's compare a white knight on h1 to a white knight on d4. We're going to talk now about the thing which is called activity. You've probably heard this online many times, where a YouTuber will say you need to go more active. What that means is basically we want our pieces, for example these knights, to control more squares. Okay, so in here, for example, if you want to compare the knight on h1 to the knight on d4, the knight on d4 would be a lot more active because it controls 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares. We compare that to this knight, okay, on h1, we can see, well, which piece is more active because it's already active. The knight on d4 is already fine. I would be a lot better if I would move the knight on h1 closer to the center to be more active like this one. So from here to here. Okay, let me now show you this on the board. I would like actually to name 3 principles that you can write down. The first principle is we want to activate our least active piece. We want them to control as many squares as possible. Okay, usually that happens by bringing them closer to the center. That's why you hear like take over the center so many times. The third thing is, which is kind of like a contradiction to the second one, but it is working on the same idea, where we want to also limit the activity of our opponent. So we want them to also control the least amount of squares possible. What do we think about a move like knight to f3? Is this a good move? And I would argue like maybe it's necessary because there could be things like this that can happen, but it's clearly a desperate move, okay, because it weakens the knight in there. This, by the way, allows us to make another thing where we can now take this bishop and we make our opponent lose the bishop pair, the advantage that he had due to that. The queen takes, and now after white takes back on e2, now we get also another thing where we can take on c3. Okay, c3, we may be breaking like a pawn chain or something like this, but that is completely fine. First of all, we open a file for our queen and rook in here, and if he does something like pawn takes here, okay, we're just going to take here, and a disaster is going to happen very, very soon. If he does b takes on c3, we're going to take here. It looks completely winning now for us. Okay, we're threatening this queen, probably going to have a queen trade, but not sure. And so white does not do that, okay? He doesn't do b takes on c3. After d takes on c3, what he does is he does the move knight to e1, okay, out of desperation, basically to defend this. And now we can see the position in this board. Who do we think is more active in this example, white or black? And I would argue that black is not just by a bit, but by a major advantage. And I would argue that black is way more active actually than white because of the fact that his rook and queen are lined up in the center against here. And there's not much that that white can actually do to stop it. Here after c takes b3, okay, bishop takes, and it really shows itself. To answer the question, who is better? Usually what we're going to do is we're going to ask who controls more squares, and especially more squares of the opponent. Now, obviously, we're not going to count, okay, every single square that black has and every single square that white has under their control. But what we can do is we can have intuition and basically ask who looks like he controls more squares, and that would be definitely black with his queen and rook here, the pawns in here that are doing very, very good job. Okay, the pawn here, it looks like due to intuition that black controls more squares. So let's conclude what we've talked about in this video. So the first thing is that we have talked about how there are 2 ways to either win or lose a game, where once the first one is where one side just gets a material advantage advantage, okay, and he's going to utilize this material advantage to either make a queen or to even materialize even more. And from there, what he's going to do is he's going to make the queen and to checkmate because of the material advantage that he has. The second scenario, the second case that there is to win a chess game is where one side will just make a very strong attack. And if looking at this game, let's just ask, what scenario do we think we're in? What case do we think we're in this example? Are we on the first case where one side just wants to get a material and positional advantage, or the second one where the sides are going to try to attack the opponent? It's probably more like the first one, because we see like there's no pawns in here on the side of the enemy king, or like an attempt by any side to make a decisive attack. In here we have a pawn advantage as black, okay, and we have a positional advantage. The second thing that we have done in this video is we have talked about positional principles, when we have set out 3 very clear positional rules to play a byte in a chess game. So the first one that we've had is we want to activate our pieces as much as possible, and therefore to basically put them on specific places where they would be able to control as much squares as possible. Play a byte in a chess game. So the first one that we've had is we want to activate our pieces as much as possible, and therefore to basically put them on specific places where they would be able to control as much squares as possible. The second thing is we want to activate first of all the piece which is the least active. So if we are talking about in this example, maybe not immediately, but I would be a bit concerned about this bishop, okay, which might not be involved whatsoever. But there are other things probably which are more important to do right now. And the third thing is, if we get an option, is to limit the activity of our opponent. For example, maybe having massive queenside space like black has in this example right here, where he does it very nicely with his b5 and c5 pawns. If you want to learn more, then you can consider subscribing, and I'll show you more content like this the next time. And if you want to get basically in the fastest way possible to 1500 ELO online, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.